of negotiations, Taiwan's legislature still waits to pass its 2025 budget.
This home is earmarked for demolition by the local government. They say it's built illegally, but the owner is refusing to leave. A case that's reignited fierce debate about indigenous land rights on Taiwan's east coast.
Plus, Taiwan could join a new US-led initiative that would allow it to co-produce weapons with allies in the region. Hello and welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Joyce Tseng. Members of Taiwan's legislature have still yet to agree on the budget for next year after 6 rounds of negotiations. It's been stalled for weeks, but it's now come down to the few clauses that have divided legislators, and hundreds of people even came out to protest. Our reporter Tiffany Wong is following the story for us from Taipei. Tiffany, what are the big deal breakers on this budget?
Hi, Joyce. As you said, the legislature has met now for the 6th time to discuss next year's budget, and they've still yet to come to a consensus after hours of discussion. Now, once again, the main opposition, Kuomintang and Taiwan People's Party, have teamed up to repel that budget, the cabinet's budget, from passing over clauses on compensation for indigenous people as well as funds for farmers and medical facilities. Now, it's even come to the point where the KMT rallied together its supporters from all over the country to come in front of the Legislative Yuan today and voice their opinions. And we saw hundreds of people, mostly indigenous people and farmers, come out in droves today, and this is what they had to say.
我们今天只是来捍卫我们自己族人的权益啦，然后也会为这个因为禁法的补助，很多原住民在这一块啦，他们也是觉得说，很多的不平，因为毕竟这个东西，他们森林跟农作物都不能去耕作的情况之下啦，他们也要有相对的去补偿。
我们来自云林的大比，我们那边都是生产水稻，我们是最基层的农民，对，大家都种水稻。 然后水稻的价格多年来都明显偏低，然后在扁政府的时候已经提升过一次，马政府的时候也提升过一次，可是到目前为止已经13年没有调涨了。
Now, an indigenous politician that I talked to earlier today said that those funds have actually already been allocated through other channels, and that the KMT is merely grasping at straws to stop the budget from passing.
And Tiffany, might there be a turning point to all this push and pull?
Well, that looks like a very long shot. As we've seen all year, the KMT and TPP have been teaming up against the ruling Democratic Progressive Party, causing squabbles and even physical fights in the legislature as they try to push their own agenda through. And they're only left with the executive branch and the Constitutional Court to sort of check over those things. And tomorrow, we're expecting a major decision from the Constitutional Court over other contentious laws passed by a joint KMT and TPP force earlier this year. Those are legislative oversight laws. Now, depending on that result, the arguments over the budget may blow over into an even bigger squabble. We may see that even spill out into society.
Thank you, Tiffany. That was Tiffany Wong live from Taipei. An indigenous activist on Taiwan's east coast is fighting the demolition of her home. She claims the local government has targeted her for her protests over nearby tourism projects on indigenous lands. Rick Lowert reports.
Indigenous activist Lin Shuling is living on borrowed time and, according to authorities, on borrowed land. They say she built parts of her home on Taiwan's east coast illegally on public property and have already tried to demolish it once this week. But Lin, who is indigenous Amis, has no plans to move from where her family have lived for generations.
我也很紧张，因为其实我这几天都睡不好，然后也有做噩梦。
It's been a years-long legal nightmare for Lin. A court recently ruled that these buildings do not fall under indigenous protection laws and must go. So far, she's kept the bulldozers at bay by gathering environmentalists and activists who say this is a matter of indigenous people's fundamental rights.
到底是海水浴场先来，还是我的祖先先来？
Many of Taiwan's 600,000 indigenous people are from here, the coastlines and mountains of Taiwan's rural southeast. They've lived here for millennia, predating the now majority Han Chinese. And although Taiwan law protects indigenous people's rights, many communities here say they face an uphill battle to preserve their languages, their ways of life, and even their land. Lin's home lies in the shadow of one of Taiwan's biggest land rights cases, an illegally built 100-room hotel handed over to the government after Lin and other indigenous activists took developers to court. The county government now says her home is obstructing redevelopment plans.
我们台东县政府基于是说，这个会影响到整个部落要去使用海滩嘛。maybe 原本是有一条公众的道路要进出，部落要使用到海滩，影响到部落族人进出。
This rugged coastline is home to unique shoreline habitats and centuries-old coral reefs. Natural resources crucial to traditional indigenous ways of life. But far from Taiwan's urban centres, economic opportunities are few. Tourism development often takes precedence.
那如果来这边观光来认识台东的话，我想应该是要一个跟自然、跟这边原住民文化可以共存，而且尊重在地的一个发展模式。它并不是一个很大型的，好像水泥建筑物。
Lin feels targeted for her activism, but says she is determined to fight this case.
将来的子孙面临到一样的问题，因为这个原住民保留地生化边的无解，然后一直让可能下一代他没有办法住在这里。
For centuries, the Amis people have lived at one with this coastline, foraging in the forests, growing crops along the shore and fishing in the sea. For Lin, it's this connection that's at stake. The reason she's willing to stand up to authorities and live in uncertainty as she defends her home from demolition. Klein Wang and Rick Lauert in Taidong County for TaiwanPlus.
To find out more about Indigenous land rights cases and Taiwan's legal protections, Rick Lauert spoke to Professor of Indigenous Law at Donghua University, Awi Mona.
How common are cases of indigenous land rights disputes in Taiwan's southeast?
It's not a new issue, but it's a very continuing conflict between the maybe the idea of the development and then idea of the preservation and the continuance of indigenous cultures. Taiwan economically less developed than other parts of Taiwan, which means the county government, even the central government, would make some of the project to help to support the local economic development. But usually, in the past, the county government usually will expel or leave out of indigenous voices or indigenous participations.
How hard is it for local governments to balance both economic development and protecting indigenous rights and cultures?
I would say there's always a way to balance the different interests, but the first thing is we must acknowledge the core stakeholder, which refers to the local indigenous peoples, especially when we have achieved to get the recognition of indigenous traditional territories in the indigenous people's basic law. Not every government are on the same page. If you have been hostile to the county government, then they might take another approach, trying to expel the indigenous indigenous claims.
Our reporting shows that although Taiwan law protects indigenous people's rights, communities still come across problems in reality. So are these laws working?
It is not indigenous people's law not working. It is the other system is not working, or the county government trying to make the other legislation not working. Because in the existing legislation, if any indigenous people have any land claims, we can trace back to their ancestral occupation, and then there is a law to make the existing indigenous people to make a lawful application to make the land become the indigenous reserve land. But there's one requirement, which means the managing parties, which means that the managing government official agencies, they have to agree to demarcate the specific land to be designated as the indigenous people's reserve land.
That was Indigenous law expert Awi Mona speaking about land rights in Taiwan. Lawmakers met today to discuss Taiwan's declining population and aging society. Changes to immigration policies were proposed as a possible solution, but as Chris Gorin reports, it remains a thorny issue.
Taiwan needs to boost the country's birth rate and attract more international talent. That was the message from officials and lawmakers speaking in the legislature today. Now, Taiwan's declining population is not a new problem, but new government figures from last week are concerning lawmakers here because they show that the problem isn't slowing down. Next year, the ratio of people over the age of 65 will surpass 20%, officially making Taiwan a super-aged society. And that number is projected to reach nearly 50% by 2070. While Taiwan has been implementing various policies to encourage people to have more children, lawmakers today are saying that low wages and labor shortages are driving the problem.
那低薪，我讲的是实质所得导致少子化的问题日趋严重，所以年轻人口的减少导致企业招聘困难，特别是在劳动密集型的产业形成企业竞争力的下降，所以产业与国力就是陷入恶性循环。
One way to offset the labor shortages from a declining birth rate is through immigration. And Taiwan has been trying to attract highly skilled foreign workers for some time. But relatively low wages and tough immigration policies make it hard to retain that talent. Just this week, a petition calling for Taiwan to end the rule that foreigners have to give up their existing citizenship in order to naturalize received enough signatures to require a response from the government, which is expected later this year. But immigration remains a sensitive topic in Taiwan, and most questions by legislators today focused on tackling the declining birth rate and population rather than easing immigration rules or attracting foreign talent. Like other countries in the region, Taiwan has yet to fully address the balance between easing immigration and its demographic issues, and it is likely to remain a policy challenge for some time to come. Joseph Wu and Chris Gorin for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's foreign minister is in the Caribbean and Latin America to strengthen diplomatic relations with official allies. Ling Jialong will represent Taiwan at St. Vincent and the Grenadines' 45th Independence Day celebration. He will also meet with lawmakers in Guatemala, St. Lucia, Belize, and St. Kitts and Nevis before returning to Taiwan on November 2nd. The trip is his first since taking office in May and is focused on boosting ties and promoting economic partnerships. At least 8 active and retired members of Taiwan's military have been charged with spying for China. Investigators say the personnel were recruited by a woman who belongs to a criminal gang and runs a temple in New Taipei, who has also been charged. Her recruits had to film themselves in uniform with a Chinese flag and say they would surrender in the event of war. They were especially tasked with passing on information about Taiwan's military planes. Investigators say the personnel came from the Army, Navy, and Air Force, and the most senior among them was a lieutenant. Taiwan's defense ministry says it may join a new U.S.-led initiative to allow some Asian countries to manufacture weapons together. In the final episode of our Defending Taiwan series, Jaime Okan takes an exclusive look at what that partnership could look like.
When it comes to making weapons, the U.S. is a global leader. Everything from artillery shells to warships, its weapon systems are some of the best in the world. Part of the reason why has been Washington's continued spending on military technology. But some observers say that times are changing.
If citizens in other countries look at how much America spends in defense, it's an extraordinarily high number. But if you look at it from the U.S. perspective and the challenge that the U.S. military has in all the obligations it has around the world, the U.S. is constrained.
Wars in Ukraine and in the Middle East, as well as soaring global demand for U.S. weapons, is making it difficult for the U.S. defense industry to keep up. With new threats in the Indo-Pacific emerging, the U.S. is looking for help.
This Navy yard in Philadelphia used to build dozens of warships back in World War II, and it was a symbol of how strong the U.S. defense base was. Faced with threats from China, it's now looking at countries like Taiwan to help co-produce some of the world's most crucial weapons.
At the U.S.-Taiwan Defense Industry Conference, Taiwan's defense ministry told TaiwanPlus that the U.S. has invited Taiwan to be part of a brand new initiative that could bring the two sides closer to producing critical weapon systems.
夏威夷它会有一个这个印太区域的一个产业韧性的一个伙伴关系，那当然有这个10几个国家来共同参与了，是不是？那这个公开参与，这是一个公开的一些资讯嘛？那在这个整个一个产业韧性的当中呢，我们也希望呢，在美国的邀请之下，我们能成为它的所谓的顾问国嘛，来对加入这个整个印太区域有关这个国防产业的一个相关的合作。
The Vice Minister was talking about a new production plan called PIPER, which stands for Partnership on Indo-Pacific Industrial Resilience. Preliminary plans show it aims to link up defense supply chains across 13 Asian countries. The goal is to pull together resources to minimize costs in producing things like missiles, fighter jets, and drones with other countries. For Taiwan, this could be game-changing, as it is often excluded from the international community due to threats and pressure from China. To understand what Taiwan will be able to do under PIPER, we met with Kelly Greco, a senior fellow with the Stimson Center who focuses on U.S. grand strategy.
Defense officials at this U.S.-Taiwan Defense Industry Conference talked about the PIPER initiative. What role can Taiwan play in that initiative?
There's a real opportunity for Taiwan to seize an advantage with the drone revolution and producing its own drones for its own defense, but being able to do so in large numbers and that it can scale up rapidly, because it would eliminate the need logistically to have to import all these things.
Kelly says that Taiwan's robust drone industry could be key to providing the best possible defense strategy as Taiwan faces the threat of invasion from China. The U.S. and Taiwan don't have official ties, but Washington provides Taiwan with almost all of its military equipment. And many believe smaller, more portable systems like drones are the way to go. While PIPER is still new and no concrete agreements have been made, Taiwan's leading semiconductor industry could work with U.S. and Taiwanese defense contractors in a joint effort, as these specialized chips are needed to make advanced systems.
And so the co-production might also be that maybe the United States is providing some parts, components that it makes, and then Taiwan assembles them, or it could be the opposite, that Taiwan is providing some components, like semiconductors, for example, that the United States is using on other weapon systems.
Taiwan already has plans to create what it calls a drone fleet, tens of thousands of these unmanned systems that could defend the country. It hopes to build these weapons as quickly as possible. And with help from the U.S. and other allies, the PIPER initiative aims to show that there is indeed strength in numbers. Andy Xue and Jaime Ocon in Washington, D.C. for TaiwanPlus.
That wraps up our Defending Taiwan series. You can visit the TaiwanPlus website to watch all of the episodes. A diplomatic rift between India and China may be over. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping have met on the sidelines of the BRICS summit in the Russian city of Kazan.
हमारा मानना है कि भारत और चीन के संबंधों का महत्व केवल हमारे लोगों के लिए ही नहीं, लेकिन वैश्विक शांति, स्थिरता और प्रगति के लिए भी.
The two leaders agreed to boost communication and cooperation. It was their first formal meeting in 5 years. Relations between the two soured in 2020 after a military clash on the disputed Himalayan border killed at least 20 Indian and 4 Chinese soldiers. To learn more about Modi and Xi's meeting, Adil Brar spoke to Swasti Rao from the Institute of Defense Studies and Analyses in New Delhi.
Does this meeting between Modi and Xi mean that China and India are trying to reset their frosty bilateral relationship?
China has had a history of not honoring its commitments, not really. There is an erosion of strategic trust, and that erosion of strategic trust cannot be built just by the fact that there's been a bit of a disengagement, unless it is followed by proper de-escalation and it is followed by, more positive developments. And the second reason is perhaps that from India's perspective, there is also this understanding that at a time when this entire global situation seems to be upended and there's just so many problems across the board, from strategic to economics to all the other crises, I think it makes sense for India somewhere to try and sort of loosen up the restrictions on Chinese investments because, Indian trade remains very dependent on China.
What effect could the meeting have on the 4-year-long military standoff between China and India on their shared border?
It is not just about, asking your troops to come back. It is also about laying down a framework for then de-escalating the number of troops from there. And also, I think the other point that we are not really paying too much attention to is that what is the relevance of all the aggressive infrastructure modernization that China has anyway done out there in the last 4 years? 4 years ago versus now, there has been a very aggressive trend there. And is China showing any reluctance or any slowing down? When it comes to that kind of infrastructure modernization is also something that will perhaps go in a long way in deciding that now the standoff is over. I think we should not really let our guards down. And if I read the situation correctly, I don't think China has really given up on its, nationalistic, so to say, whipping up of those emotional sentiments when it comes to expansion.
China has emphasized the need to promote multipolar world. Does New Delhi agree with Beijing's vision of an arrangement that challenges the current US-led world order?
Although India is also a strong adherent of multipolarity per se, because like I said, that multipolarity by itself is a very legit kind of a foreign policy aspiration, because in a world where great power contestation and militarization is actually making the world a more unsafe place, there is a view that multipolarity actually sort of reduces these tensions, okay? So, and also keeps the options open for a lot of middle order powers. So I think India, the difference stems from the fact that what multipolarity basically means is different from what perhaps a set of countries like China, Russia, Iran, or North Korea might mean.
That was Swasti Rao in New Delhi. Barred from accessing assisted reproductive services in Taiwan, a lesbian couple, City and Moda, traveled to Cambodia to start their family. As Harrell Hughes reports, their journey was far from easy.
On a street corner in New Taipei, Moda and City wait for the school bus to pick up their 4-year-old daughter, Dobie. The two women have been together for 8 years and are legally married. They welcomed Dobie in 2020, thrilled to have their first child.
我们两个在争宠，我们现在会觉得我的女儿就是皇上，我们两个就是嫔妃。今天皇上你想跟谁睡啊？
As a lesbian couple, starting their family was a long and difficult process. According to Taiwan's laws, women who freeze their eggs can only access them with their husband's signature, a problem for Taiwan's single women and queer couples like City and Moda. Unable to start their family in Taiwan, they had to look abroad for a pregnancy that was far from easy.
最重要的问题是，我也碰到过，就是我差点死掉这件事情。就是我在柬埔寨的时候。
Complicating the pregnancy further was a need for coordination between doctors across international borders. But ultimately, they succeeded and had Dobie. 2 years later, they decided to try again, spending well over $60,000 for the 2 treatments. This time, City decided to carry their child, hoping pregnancy would be easier for her. But after 9 months, tragedy struck.
都很顺利，然后到我要准备要就是临盆，等他生出来的那个礼拜呢，突然间呢，小朋友就没有心跳，对，然后那个事件就让我觉得就是一个考验吧，就是可能我就是一个过得太顺利的一个人。
Although their journey has been difficult, City and Moda are eager to share their experience, working with Taiwan LGBT Family Rights Advocacy, a Taiwan-based NGO focused on advocacy, legal rights, and organizing family events for queer couples.
看到这么多的同志家庭，最重要是看到孩子就是在地上就是爬追逐来互相就是在那个愉快的下午陪伴彼此的时候，他们其实有给我们一个很棒的回馈是，当他们看到真的有人实践了同志成家的这一个理想的时候，他们就更有信心了。他们就知道他们不是全台湾唯一一对就是想要有小孩的lesbian couple 这样子。
Taiwan's health ministry has proposed an amendment to the law on assisted reproduction, but City and Moda decided not to wait and are instead trying again, hoping to expand their family no matter the cost nor the potential for heartbreak. In their view, the risk is worth it for the chance of a happy ending. Eason Chen, Millie Hughes, and Harrell Hughes for TaiwanPlus.
Tune in again tomorrow for more LGBTQ+ stories from Taiwan as the country prepares to celebrate Pride. Thank you for joining us for TaiwanPlus News. Don't forget to visit our website and follow us on social media. Before we go today, check out this 3-year-old German boy making a splash in the art world with paintings that have already sold for thousands of euros each. I'm Joyce Tseng. Have a good evening.